And Lieutenant McAllister, he was in charge of the ordnance lab, which was on the other side of the fort. And he was over there mixing up some fireworks. Actually, they were getting ready to celebrate July 4th. And he was with a couple of his guys, and they were in the ordnance lab. It was very hot. It was very still. And we don't know exactly how it happened, but there was a spark, there was a fire, there was an explosion. And McAllister, two of his men were tragically killed. And McAllister took this as a sign. He thought to himself, man, this is a sign. I need to act on this. We need to take this very tragic event and make some positive out of it. He talked to the commanding officer and said, hey, we don't have a place for soldiers to worship. We need a church on Fort Monroe. And the commanding officer at the time said, I agree. If you can raise the money to build a chapel, we can find a spot to do it. McAllister went around to all his soldiers, the whole post, and eventually they raised enough money to build this chapel. It was consecrated in 1858. It is the chapel of the Centurion. This Roman Centurion is the first Roman Gentile converted to Christianity, and they thought it was fitting to consecrate this chapel in honor of a military figure. What we see over the years, again during the Civil War, plays a very, very important role, and then even into the 20th and 19th century, very, very important. We have very, very many figures that come and worship here. Woodrow Wilson sat in this pew. Dwight D. Eisenhower's son is married in this chapel, and my great uncle is actually also married in this chapel. That is one of the most common things that happens to me at the museum is we have someone who comes in and says, hey, I was married at the chapel, or my family, there was a funeral or wedding at the chapel, so we often open it for guests. It is part of the regular experience for guided tours, and the DeRussy window right here is one of the many windows at the chapel. And Edward DeRussy was a general. He served here both as supervising engineer, but he was also commanding officer at one point. And one of his relatives, Kathy DeRussy, actually lives at the Chamberlain. So she's one of our expert guides of this space. And she has really taken the chapel as her own. So anytime we do chapel tours, Kathy is here. She's about 80 years old, but she is spry and she's witty and she's fun. But this is a real special place for her because whenever she looks, she sees that name. She tells us she's the last of the DeRussys. And I don't know exactly how she does it, but whenever there's a high school group in here, they're rowdy and they're wanting to be out and they're wanting to do things, they're looking at their phone. She has the most magical experiences with those kids. She often comes back and says, hey, I turned around and there was 10 students kneeling in prayer. Another time she shared with us that she was in the back of the chapel about to lock up, and there was about 3 or 4 kids standing here singing. And to me, that just goes back to what Dr. Ellis said, that the importance of faith at Fort Monroe, the importance of this chapel to the soldiers and to the families and to those folks that still come here. So again, it's a real place of reflection, I think. When this was an active Army post, the door was always open. There was a chaplain here. So I remember as a young kid coming out here with my dad, and the chaplain would often be here and say, come on in and take a look at the windows. You know, how's your day going? And why are you here? And that type of thing. But it's a really, really neat place. It's still an active congregation, as you've heard, and a lot of local ties. The history that's in this building is pretty significant. The baptismal font dates to late 1800s. The eagle lectern is just amazing. It's beautiful. We haven't dated it, but his picture's as back as the time of the Civil War. It's shown here. In the 1960s, the Army actually they fixed the foundations. There was all kinds of termite damage, and when you go back and look at the plans, you see evidence where these two spaces, this space and this space, are reinforced a little bit extra because this lectern is very, very heavy. Last thing I'll say is we do have 3 Tiffany windows in this space, which are very, very precious to us. 2 are over here, and you may recognize the name on the left. That's the McAllister window. This window was placed here in honor of Colonel McAllister. He was the lieutenant who raised all the money for this church in the 1850s. And the other window is is in honor of Helen Fargo Squires. You may recognize the name Fargo. I have a mortgage I pay to Fargo every month. It's the same family, and the son of William Fargo, the daughter of William Fargo married a Robert Squires, and you can see from the age she died very, very young, and it was very, very tragic. And there was a window installed in her honor. The other Tiffany window is back in the rear here. You can see when you leave, it's the Gifford window right over here. You can check it out when you leave. The last story I'll share, because again, I love stories in this space. There is a great little ghost story that's associated with this space. In 1933, there was a fire in this space up in Oregon. Legend has it that Private Austin was a soldier who reported to duty here, and the chaplain kept trying to get him to come to church. Every time he walked by the church, the chaplain would say, "Hey, come to church." Finally, Private Austin says, "Chap, if you tell me to come to church one more time, and if I actually show up, the church is liable to burn down." Well, legend has it a couple months later, Private Austin is killed in a tragic training exercise. Everyone files in for funeral services. Everyone's sitting waiting for the program or for the service to begin. They bring they bring Austin's the casket down. They set the casket on the altar, and everyone's bowed their head in prayer. The next thing we know, fire! And a fire had actually broken out in the right behind the attic space behind the organ. Everyone files out of the chapel. They grab the coffin. They run out the building. They call the firefighters. This is 1933, so it's still a little primitive. They put the fire out. The chapel's saved. The organ is lost. But they continue the services on the building right across the street. So there is a funeral service on the building across the street. But many people say that this is one of those ghost stories. Come to find, they were mixing paint. They were doing work. So again, I don't think there's any story like that. But definitely take a quick look around. The flags, historically, these would have been original flags of different Coast Artillery Commands and Artillery Commands. These are reproductions. The Army took many of the originals. These are not the original pews. These are reconstructed in about 1930, but they are from the original plans. But it was designed by Richard Upjohn in the 1850s. He's a noted architect of chapels like this. Take a look around if you want a few minutes, if there's time for quiet and reflection.
Yeah, any questions?
Questions. It's a moving place.
This was interdenominational.
Yeah, there was actually when this was active, there would have been 2 services. Actually, sometimes 3. It just depended. But they would have technically a Protestant service. Sometimes they'd have an Episcopal. It just depends on kind of what was going on and what chaplains they had available to them, actually. But there was always a Catholic church on post, St. Mary's. So the Catholic church dates to pre-Civil War. So interestingly, it's about the same time they built this church. So I think also there was a little something going on between the Catholics and the Protestants too. They say, hey, they've got their church, we need a church too. So.
Robert, I noticed that some of the flags are in bad condition.
Yeah.
Are those reproductions or are those original?
They all these are reproductions, right?
Some of the flags are encapsulated.
Yeah, these 3 that are encapsulated, and these 2 also are originals. These are ones that probably could use some conservation. And again, all of them used to be, original, but the Army.
And all of it's part of the Army collection, including the altar and the lectern and things like that. So, all belong to us.
But the organ, which was replaced in 1933, it's a pretty. It actually packs a punch, so you can feel it in your chest, which is really a special feeling. But really neat building. The other window that's kind of neat is the Taps window, and I'm sorry, it popped in my mind. I got to show you all the Taps window. 1852. Taps was first played during the Civil War after the Battle of Monroe, and the soldiers that. Again, legend has it, the story that the soldiers were actually from Fort Monroe who were the first to play taps. Yes, sir.
I really have a question.
Yes.